Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to TacticalBassin. Today we are talking lipless crankbaits. We're going to talk about how to throw lipless crankbaits during the spring and moving forward as we go through the spawn into the post spawn. The way that you're going to fish them and the places that you fish them is going to change. So come along, let's take a look at lipless cranks. Now, it's no secret that Tim and I both love throwing a lipless. You guys know, if you followed the channel at all, the passion that we have for a Lucky Craft LV500. But there are a lot of different baits, there are a lot of different styles, and they all have different purposes. So what we're going to do today is talk about the different ways to retrieve them, where to throw them, and what the different styles of baits are for. There's going to be a bunch of baits, so down in the video description, I will link you all the different baits and color recommendations and all that stuff so that you don't have to try and keep track. But coming out the gate, let's start the earliest in the season, because some of you guys still have those pre-spawners. Pre-spawn, the way that we like to fish that bait is slow on the bottom. We've done dedicated videos on all of this, so I'm not going to go super in depth, but the short version is we fish primarily that LV500. The other one that does really good for it is that Jackal TN70, but the LV is our number one. And essentially you throw that bait out there, you let it hit the bottom, and you just pick that rod up and then reel down the slack. Pick it up, reel down the slack. That's how we fish them. It's almost like fishing a jig, and it drives me crazy that it works because it's so silly, but it works everywhere that we go in the country. It works exceptionally in the pre-spawn. We catch monster bass doing it. We've got fish over 10 pounds on the channel in videos that have eaten the LV fished that way. Giant smallmouth too, but it is unbelievably effective, and if you're not doing it, you need to do it. Now, the gear that you use to do that is exceptionally important as well, but we'll circle back on that. So that's that early season way to do it. But as it progresses, as we start getting into the spawn and the post spawn, it starts changing because the grass starts coming up. Once that grass starts to rise, you've got a couple options. You can still slow fish the bottom, and I'll explain in a second how to do that. Number two is you can start ticking grass. Number three is you can just start burning over the top, or burn and kill it as well. Just a little variation on there. So if you're still going to do the slow fish, as the grass starts to grow up in the lakes, the grass, the junk, the tules and bulrushes, and you get that slime on the bottom, how do you do it? Well, it's really simple. The rod that we use a very specific rod for hopping bottom, actually for throwing a lipless at all. This is a CBR 845. It's a Loomis rod. And we've talked a lot about this rod. It's got a very specific action. It's very soft, but we're able to stick those giant fish, and that whole rod will bow up, and then you just slow play them. And you can catch truly monster fish on that little bait with size 4 treble hooks. Notice, by the way, they come with a 4 and a 6. We changed them both out to 4s. But size 4 hooks, we keep those monster fish pegged by using the right rod. Now, as that grass grows up, you begin to have problems, because you'll hang up in that grass and you're pulling and pulling, it won't come out. So what you do is we start adjusting equipment. The thicker the grass gets, the stouter the rod. So you actually leave the crankbait rod behind, go to a heavier action crankbait rod, like a 7/6 medium heavy or heavy crankbait rod. Then you leave that behind. You go to a longer medium heavy jig rod. Then you go all the way to a heavy jig rod before it's over. Now that sounds crazy, but hear me out on this. You fire down in that grass, and when you hang up, you can't clean the bait. But the fish are in that grass. That's why we're fishing it. If you go to a stouter rod, and then you take that light wire hook, and you get rid of it, and you start stepping up. You go to a 3X hook. And then when you go to a really heavy rod, you go to a 4X hook, like these. That hook is getting stronger and stronger and stronger to match the rod. So you match the gear. You change your split rings out to owner hyperwire number 3s, and you start increasing the strength of the hook to match the strength of the rod. In the beginning, when we're fishing that light rod, you stick those fish and you just lean back on them. That rod will load up, and you just slow play them. As that rod gets stronger and stronger, because you're needing to rip out of that grass, and as the grass gets thicker, you need to rip harder. That's the way we fish it. You get it stuck in that grass, rip it free. Reel up that slack. Stuck in the grass, rip it free. As you're going through that process, when you hit those fish on that stout rod with stout hooks, you need to start grinding them. So as the rods get stouter, the hooks get stouter, the way you fight them gets much more aggressive. Get them in the boat, because that rod can unload and they can throw that bait. When you're slow fishing with lighter hooks and a lighter rod, you just slow play them. That rod will stay loaded up. Does that make sense? All right, now number 2 was ticking grass. That's where all the traditional lipless are gonna come into play. That's where your red-eye shad is coming in as a huge player. Some people will hop a red-eye shad as well, but I really prefer that TN70 or that LV500 for that. So your red-eye shad, the bigger quakes, that's a 6 cents. There's another one of the, that's the even bigger quake there. The true rattle trap itself, another great option for that. What you do there is you standard lipless rod, because you're staying above the grass. Fire out, let it drop just a little bit, and then just medium retrieve. And anytime you catch up on the grass, you just quick clean it. So this isn't getting down hung in the bottom and ripping all the way up out of that grass. This is just reel along, ticking the grass. When it ticks and jerks free, those fish are on it. They just come out and clobber that thing. Now the third option is to just stay up over the top of the grass. The farther you get along after the spawn, the more you're just gonna be burning. And for that, that's where some of those really inexpensive baits, the true rattle trap and the spot, that cotton cordell spot. How many times have you guys heard me talk about that one? That's a very inexpensive bait. But just by happenstance, those inexpensive baits, they sink slower than the others. That quake is a pretty slow fall as well compared to some of the others. Those are baits that do really well just on that straight medium retrieve. They'll do great. They're a great bait. They track really well. They're awesome, and you just burn, just cover water, and they'll stay really high in the water column. They can go really fast and stay true and run a course. They're great baits. Now, if your fish start getting a little finicky, there's 2 places we're gonna go from there. I mentioned that you can break up that cadence. This is the Mega Bass, the Vibration X, and then the silent version. And the silent, I actually throw the silent and I throw the junior version. I have massacred them on this little junior version. Now, it's a more expensive bait. It's a more balanced and refined bait. But these little Vibration X baits, the junior and the standard, what I like to do with these is I'm over the tops of the grass, and I'm just burn, 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 and then I just put a break in my cadence. That was all it was. You see, I didn't actually stop. I just put a break in there. That's all it is. So that bait's charging along, and that fish comes out, and it just breaks its cadence. And right when it breaks its cadence, they're on it. It's just like hanging in the grass and ripping free, minus the grass. You're just over the top of that stuff. It works extremely well. And the one bait that I've found that will do it the best is that Vibration X. And sometimes I do so well with the silent version. It's amazing how much better it is some days. It's just one of those things that you have to try. And this particular color too, it's like a chartreuse blue chrome. I don't know why I picked that particular one up in the first place, but I have done such good work with that even in really clear water. Now, we've talked about Down on the bottom, we've talked about ripping that grass, ticking the grass, and then we've talked about burning up on top. What about no grass? That's an important factor for a lot of people. So no grass, I'm gonna go straight back to either that LV500 or that TN70, because these two baits fall extremely quickly. Like that cotton cordell spot, the reason it's so good over grass is it stays up so high in the water column and then tracks really well. It's got that really high pitch, I don't know if you can hear that really high pitched tinny sound compared to an LV. Night and day different sounds. So that spot is so good over grass, but the LV or that jackal, once you get away from grass or you're on a lake that has no grass, these work better because even at those faster speeds, they're gonna run lower in the water column. So if you're paralleling bank, fan casting on a flat, trying to parallel bottom, you can do it much more easily with these slightly heavier baits. Plus they're really refined, they run exceptionally well, they both have great sounds. That is the way to go if you don't have grass. And then color-wise, really depends on your bait fish and your water clarity. If your water gets clear in the post spawn, like for us, when our shad spawn happens, right after the bass spawn, the shad start to spawn. Those shad get up on that bank and it's typically pretty clear water. Something like a ghost minnow is just going to destroy them. Something like that, or a really natural color like that in the jackal, just a scaled pattern. Here's another one in that quake. Just a really natural ghosty type color is going to do the best. But if you've got some clarity, or I'm sorry, if you've got some murkiness in the water, that's when you're gonna start going to those solid shad patterns. And then of course, depending on your bait fish. The one thing you will notice is that I don't really have any craws laying here. The farther into the post spawn I get, the more I go away from craw and into the bait fish. But right now you can still definitely get on that craw pattern. The only thing I want to add to the mix, even though this is a lipless video, is a square bill. We're gonna end on this one. The reason why I throw the square bill back into the mix is that pre-spawn, spawn, and as you go to the post spawn, sometimes those fish just get up in the junk. The only baits that you're really able to run are the spot or your traditional rattle trap, but sometimes you have to go so fast to stay up that the fish, as that water's not quite warmed up yet, they don't quite want to chase it. So still leave a place in your arsenal for a square bill. This particular one, that's called Rooster. It's a river to sea biggie. Caught a giant fish on it earlier this spring. And it was the same scenario. It was junk coming up and I was trying to throw the lipless over the top and I felt like I was just going too fast. But by going to the square bill, you can do a stop and go. You can run it down, pause, run it down, pause, run it down. And when you do that, you spend a lot more time in front of that fish and they'll just come out and lash out at it. As that water gets really warm, the lipless tends to take over. But again, on that front end, when you want to be on that burn and bite, but they're just not willing to go that fast for it up there in the shallows, don't be afraid to turn back to a square bill. Guys, I hope this information helps you. We've done a lot of videos about lipless, about square bills, about all of this, but there are always those little nuances, those little things you want to pick up and change and adapt to become a better angler. Hopefully this helps you. Hopefully you're able to catch some bigger bass this spring, and you are going to have a lot of fun throwing a lipless. You can cover a ton of water. You can pull up small fish. You can pull up monster fish. You can burn it over the tops of stuff. You can fish it right down in the junk. It's an incredibly adaptable bait. Much more adaptable than all of your other crankbait styles. So don't be afraid to throw it. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.